So, what could you do if nobody told you that you couldn't? In the skit, we saw this woman having a conversation about being a free thinker. And the next thing you knew, she heard her dad's voice in her head, whispering. Whose voices are in our heads? Whose voices are in your head? Your head. Yours or yours or yours or mine. And what do they tell us that we can do or that we can't do? That we can expect to get this result or that result? What if nobody told you that you couldn't? There are so many things that being married to a hypnotherapist. I understand a little bit about how powerful the subconscious mind is and what it grabs onto. And it uses to construct this whole version of reality. You say, how old do you think you'll live to? Our minds instantly reach for reference points. Well, the average person today lives between this year and this year. This age and this age. For males, it's this. For females, it's this. Well, in my family, people traditionally die young, or they traditionally have very long lives. And so we start looking for all of these reference points, allowing other people to think for us. 100 years ago, most of us would be the extreme version of senior citizens. Average life expectancy was about 40 years old. So we would all in this room be right on the verge of freaks of nature. Come and see the old person. There. 50. Now, we see things all over the internet about 50 is the new 30. And we have different expectations. You know, just even a few years ago, you know, let's say a generation ago, there were certain expectations. When you were this age, you would act this way, you would have this quality of life, you would be able to do this or be able to do that, or have the limitation of doing this or the limitation of doing that. Now we have far exceeded those expectations, so now we expect something different on a collective unconscious. As a society, as a people who are co-creating this reality together, we have certain expectations. What if, in biblical times, the average person would be 900 years old? You'd be looking at being about 450 years old before you had your midlife crisis. It would allow us to paint our current reality from a whole different paintbrush. Different expectations of our body, of our life experience, of what we have to look forward to or not, would be very different if we expected to be 450 years old before we hit midway through. How differently would you think if you actually expected to live to be 900? Now, this may seem like a fairy tale, but 100 years ago, it was a fairy tale that people could live to 50, or 60, or 70, or 80, or 90, or 100, or 100 plus. And now, most of us in this room know somebody who has been in triple digits, living a wonderful quality of life, in fact, a higher quality of life than some 20-year-olds. It changes our expectation. Last week we saw a video about a guy named Nick who was born without arms and legs. Where would his reality be if he allowed other people to think for him? If he allowed them to have, if he embraced their limitations and said, this is what I can expect for my life. Instead, he chose to think something different. Now, inside of this lifetime, when my body was developing, I was a big kid and my mom was a little bitty tiny woman. And so my whole bottom half, my whole legs didn't develop right. And my biological dad, who was fairly well-to-do, owned a chain of jewelry stores, took me to every specialist in the country, and they said, there's nothing we can do. Your son will never walk. Buy him a wheelchair. My mom, being the stubborn little redhead that she is, decided that she was going to take me to Shriners Children's Hospital. And they said, well, we seriously doubt it, but we'll give it our best shot. And they began to bust me up into half-body casts and set this and pin that and put all these things together. And until I was about 5, I had different levels of cast and different length of bar that went in between, and it was always one solid unit. There was just all kinds of bars and casts and goofy things. And they got all done and they said to my mom, "It's a miracle. Your son can walk, but he will never run, jump, swim, any of these kind of things. But it's a miracle that he can walk, at least for now." My mom, who normally is sitting right over here, but this week is out on a cruise in the Bahamas with Pop, in her infinite wisdom decided not to tell me. She didn't tell me what I could do. She didn't tell me what I couldn't do. And so because I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be able to, I ran, I jumped, I swim. I competed in martial arts tournaments for about 12 years, went to the state level for swimming, and played water polo, football, soccer. You name it, I've done it physically, simply because nobody told me that I couldn't. Nick, who we saw in the video last week, does things that most of us consider amazing, because he wasn't told that he couldn't. And when he was told that he couldn't, he said, essentially, "I reject your reality and substitute my own." Now, how many things in our lives do we set as these limitations based upon the belief system, the little voices in our heads? Did they need to be there? Did they serve a purpose for a time? But now, especially in recent time with the vibrational shift in 11-11-11, raising all of our frequencies, are we helping ourselves outside of our box or into a bigger box or a redefined box? What are the boxes? What are the limitations towards anything that you really want to do, be, experience, have? Who told you that you could? Who told you that you couldn't? Oftentimes, it's those of us who don't know any better that accomplish amazing things. When, once upon a time, I wanted to work in radio, and there was a radio station that had just opened up in the town that I was in South Dakota, and it was a rock radio station. We'd never had a rock radio station before, so I wanted to work there, and I thought it'd be cool. And I called and I said, "I'd really like to come work for your company," and they said, "We have no job openings." I said, "Oh, but I really want to come work for your company." I said, "I understand that, we don't have any job openings." I said, "Okay." So the next day at 8:15 a.m., I called the radio station. I asked to talk to Leah Green, who's the general manager of the station. I said, "Hi, Leah, this is Scott. I talked to you yesterday. Has anything opened up?" She said, "No, it sure hasn't. Thanks, though." And the next day at 8:15, I called. I said, "Hi, Leah, this is Scott. I was just seeing if anything opened up since yesterday." And she said, No, there sure hasn't." I said, "Okay, well, have a good day." And the next day I called at 8:15 a.m. And it reached the point that you could set your watch by 8:15 a.m. when I would call Leah Green at Hot 93.1 Radio. And it didn't take long before everyone at Hot 93.1 Radio was taking bets to see if the phone would ring at 8:15 a.m. After a short 2.5 weeks, a total of 12 phone calls, Leah Green said, I need to meet you. You need to come in." And she said, "Things haven't changed. We still have no position for you. But I had to meet the man who had the audacity to call me every morning at 8:15 a.m. And after a very short conversation, Leah decided to offer me a job. First, I had to get licensed through the RAB, the Radio Association of Broadcasters, so they had to pay to put me to school to get licensed to come to work for the radio station, and they had to create a position for me because one didn't exist. And she put me in sales, and she handed me the hardest accounts that no one could ever close in the history of the company. No one had, because it used to be another radio station before it changed to this format, whatever. And so they had some bigger accounts, Bridgestone, Firestone, and Ford, and all these things that their most seasoned salespeople couldn't close. And she handed them to me. And I said, okay, and so I got it, and I started rolling, and I started closing deals and bringing in sales, and okay, Bridgestone wants this much, and these people want that much, and this, that, and these, those. He said, Scott, that's impossible. You can't be closing these accounts. I said, nobody told me. Nobody told me that you set me up to fail. Nobody told me that you were giving me a job that was impossible. I didn't know that I couldn't close them, so I did. Sometimes it was being a little creative. When I would call person after person after person and they would hang up on me or not take my call, I went to every yard sale I could find in Rapid City, South Dakota for 2 weeks, and I bought every pair of shoes, male and female, that they had. And I would staple my business card to the shoe. And on it I would attach a note that said, now that I've got my foot in the door, let's talk. Now there is nothing that grabs a CEO's attention like coming back from lunch and having a stinky sneaker or a high heel pump or something sitting on their desk when they come back. What the heck is that? I got more meetings from stinky shoes at about 10 cents a pair. Simply because nobody told me that I couldn't do that. Nobody told me that I shouldn't do that. Let's look at some of the examples in our lifetime of the richest man in the world, Bill Gates. Dropped out of college before people told him what to think, before people told him what the limitations were, before he knew what he could do or couldn't do, what the limitations would be. He quit first. And because he didn't know what he couldn't do, he did it anyway. Wrote new books. Often in life, we hear all of these little voices in our head, these voices of other folks saying, before I can have this, I have to do that. Which is very, very true if you believe it. It's very, very not true if you don't believe it. We've got a little picture hanging over here in our hallway that Judy made for us of a rainbow and a unicorn. Because Mary and I, when we remember to, because we're human, when we remember to embrace the energy of rainbows and unicorns, that's the energy for us that eliminates all the rules. It gives God room to work. When we moved to Florida, we knew that we wanted to move here, we wanted to be closer to my folks, we knew that we wanted to buy a house because the real estate market was so down and you could buy a really good house for a cheap price and it was good stuff and blah, blah, blah. Well, no one had told me goofy things like you need credit. Who knew? I was raised in the Midwest, and the mentality was if you wanted something, you wrote a check. If you couldn't write a check, then keep saving or lower your expectations about what you can afford. Come on. So when we went in to see the mortgage person, they said, Scott, you are a ghost in our machine. You don't exist. You have a credit score of 0. And that's impossible for a person of your age. Well, maybe it's impossible, but I got it. Long story short, I had to do some things to get a credit card, which I never wanted, and all these things just to build a credit score, because everybody told me that I had to do that. And I looked around and I said, this is silly. Talked to my wife. I said, honey, this is silly. I don't like it. I hear all these people getting these mortgages at these big banks, and this bank selling it to that bank, and they don't even know who the heck they're doing business with anymore. And maybe I'm just simple, but I'd like to know who I'm doing business with. I want to be able to look across the table and say, hey, how you doing? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to find a house. We're going to buy it from a person. Have it financed by another person. And it's just going to be people. People shaking hands and people writing their name. And that's going to be that. And Mary said, well, I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but you believe it mighty strongly, so I'm pretty sure it will. my parents, who we were living with at the time, because we hadn't found a house yet, said, that's not the way it works. You have to do this and do this and do this and pre-approved and blah, 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 and all these things. And then you can get a house, but it's going to take you this long and cost you this much and all these things. Well, along came a Saturday afternoon, and Mary and I were scheduled to go meet with a mortgage broker. And instead, well, my phone rang, and somebody called and said, yeah, you did a reading for a buddy of mine, and I'd like for you to come do a reading for me. I said, okay, when works for you? He said, oh, this afternoon's good if you got some time. Now, my wife had scheduled a meeting with a mortgage broker that afternoon, and I, normally speaking, don't make house calls. But what fell out of my mouth was, sure, how's 2 o'clock? I'll be there. Much to my wife's chagrin, who's saying, got a meeting with a mortgage person to get the loan so we can get the house so that we can da-da-da-da-da. So I don't know. That's what God said. So I'm gonna go do this. And I went to this person's house and did a reading and had a great time and ended up bumping into the buddy of his that I'd done a reading for just a week or two earlier. And his buddy said, well, how's that house hunting thing going? Blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you know, pretty good. And all these things. And the guy who I had just met, had just done a reading for, had known for about an hour and a half, grand total, said, you got a mortgage lined up? I said, no, I sure don't. In fact, I was supposed to go meet with a mortgage person, but I don't know. I was told to come here instead. He said, well, he said, I think that you might be the answer to my prayers. I had a deal that I was just going to do that fell through. And the bank's paying me X amount, and I'd like to make Y amount, and blah, blah, blah. And if you'll agree to X% interest, I'll write a check for your house. Well, cool, that sounds pretty good. Within a week or two, we walked into this house, and there was a guy here showing it. Now, anybody who's ever bought a house, raise your hand. When you make the offer, there's a stack of papers about this thick, and you got to initial every page and do all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I'm a simple Midwest guy. I didn't like all that. So I came in here, Mary and I came in here, we looked at this house, we liked it, blah, blah, blah. And the guy who was showing the house was the realtor of the house, but he was also the person who represented the doctor who owned the house and blah, blah, blah. And I called him up and I said, well, I think I'd like to make an offer on the house. He said, okay, what do you got? I said, well, you're wanting this much and it needs a new chimney, so I'll give you that much if you put the chimney on it. He says, well, let me call you back. Call him back about 20 minutes later. So I talked to the doc. He says, he'll take that price, but you got to do the chimney. I said, okay, fair enough. He said, when do you want to close on the house? This was around my birthday, so it would have been about the 21st, 22nd of December. I said, well, I'd like to get it done this year. He says, okay, how about Tuesday? Tuesday would be the 27th of December, so about 4 days, 4 or 5 days was the close. I said, okay, well, we'll meet you down at the title office. So we called up our buddy who owned the house and the buddy who was preparing the paperwork on the house, and they called up the title folks, and we called up the other feller who was writing the check. We all met down at the title office and took turns signing the papers, and they handed us keys and said, okay, well, enjoy your new house. And it's been our home ever since. I went back and we were talking to the folks about it, and they said, that just can't happen. It doesn't happen that way. And Mary and I just looked at each other and winked and said, rainbows and unicorns. You bet. It can happen that way. It can be a win-win for everybody. It's the same thing with, I can walk, run, jump, or swim, or I can't. You can have this, or you can't have this. You have to do this first, or you don't. What are the limitations in your life? And are you willing to allow God's rainbows and unicorns to come in and supersede the limitations of other people's thinking that may have governed your thinking, governed the results that you've expected? If everybody in business experienced a 300% growth a year, anything short of that would just seem ridiculous. Growing, then anything outside of that is outside of the status quo, it's outside of the norm. We couldn't have that. Unless we had rainbows and unicorns. No, we could. What is it that you really, really want? Because you can have it. Absolutely can have it. Be it, do it, become it, experience it. There is always a way. In the skit we talk about, but I've had my own experiences too. It's not just other people's thoughts and realities. I've had experiences that have substantiated this whole way of thinking. But as the spirit guide Tom had pointed out, those experiences were based upon the thinking that created those experiences. Even though we're the same us, as we change our box, we change our expectations, we change our expectations, we change the actual results that we get. So I invite you this week, anytime you feel yourself mentally bumping up against a wall, is to just push pause for a second and listen for whose voice that's actually created this wall. In the skit, it was the person's dad, or a teacher, or a past relationship, or a teacher, or a minister, or anybody. This week, when you bump up against any wall mentally, question it, and then decide whether you want it to be there or not. And I ask you to ask yourself, what could you do if nobody told you that you couldn't?